Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive into the truly haunting story of Margaret Clitherow, a woman whose unwavering faith in 16th century York led to one of the most brutal executions in English history. Her story isn't just about religious persecution. It's also a testament to the unimaginable pain she endured for her beliefs and the lengths a mother would go to protect her family. In an era of paranoia where being a Catholic was a death sentence, Margaret was accused of a crime she couldn't admit to, harboring Catholic priests. But the real injustice wasn't just the indictment, it was the legal loophole that sealed her fate. She refused to enter a plea of either guilty or not guilty to protect her children and servants from being forced to testify against her. This choice led to her being sentenced to death by pressing, a medieval form of torture where she was slowly crushed under heavy stones until her bones broke and her life was extinguished. Her death was a brutal symbol of the dark intersection between religious fanaticism and state-sanctioned brutality. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I would love to know where you're listening from and what the local time is there right now. Feel free to leave a comment below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the shadowed streets of York in the 16th century, where the muffled clatter of wooden carts and the distant toll of church bells drifted through narrow alleys, fear of religious reprisal ruled every household. Born in the year 1556 to humble yet respectable parents, Margaret Clitherow entered the world as the eldest of 3 children. Her father, Thomas Middleton, was a wax chandler whose modest shop offered flickering light against the gloom of Tudor dusk, and her mother, Anne Quinn, tended both hearth and heart with gentle diligence. Margaret's 2 younger siblings, a brother named Robert and a sister called Elizabeth, looked to her for guidance in times of uncertainty, and she learned early the weight of responsibility that comes with being firstborn. Her childhood, though free from want, was not untouched by the undercurrents of Tudor politics. Education for girls in York at that time was scarce, yet Margaret's parents, recognizing her quiet curiosity and steady nature, arranged for her to receive rudimentary lessons in reading, basic Latin prayers, and the arithmetic necessary to keep her father's accounts. In those candlelit evenings, she pored over worn prayer books and practiced script in flowing copperplate, dreaming of worlds beyond the city walls. By the age of 15, she had become known throughout her district as the calm one, able to soothe frightened servants when the shrill cry of a priest hunter echoed nearby, and to comfort her own family when fines for unauthorized gatherings threatened their livelihood. At the age of 17, Margaret married John Clitherow, a prosperous butcher from a prominent merchant adventurers company. Their union brought her not only the comfortable trappings of affluence, but also the means to exercise her convictions. By 18, she bore 2 children of her own, Anne, age 1, and little Thomas, scarcely 6 months old yet. Rather than retreat into the safety of motherhood alone, she began to feel the stirrings of a deeper calling. England's religious settlement under Queen Elizabeth I in 1559 had outlawed Catholic rites, branding any who celebrated the Mass as traitors to the crown. Yet in whispered courtesy among trusted neighbours, Margaret discovered secret signals. A rose placed atop a gatepost, an arrangement of pottery on a windowsill, even the tone of a husband's cough, each a silent summons to gather. In a chamber at the back of their home, cleverly concealed behind a false panel of oak, Margaret fashioned a clandestine oratory. There, beneath the flicker of too many candles and the hush of evening prayers, she welcomed itinerant priests into a world that dared not exist in daylight. The room bore the telltale signs of resistance. An altar crudely fashioned from butcher's block, hidden compartments lined with rosaries and missals, and escape routes through narrow passages that led beneath the hearth. While John Clitherow maintained outward allegiance to the Church of England, his business thriving and his reputation unblemished, Margaret risked everything by transforming their household into the beating heart of Catholic defiance in Yorkshire. Yet in early March of the year 1586, the carefully woven tapestry of secrecy began to unravel. A Flemish boy of 11, invited into their home to learn rudimentary English and Latin, betrayed the very household that sheltered him. Under the weight of interrogation and perhaps the terror of torture, he revealed every detail: the hidden chapel behind the larder, the coded conversations by candlelight, and, most damningly, the presence of Father John Mush himself. Armed with this intelligence, The men of Sheriff Thomas Kim descended upon the Clio residence before dawn. They forced open locked doors, heaved aside false panels, and laid bare the network Margaret had nurtured for years. When the officers finally stood upon the threshold of her secret oratory, Margaret neither trembled nor raised her voice in protest. Instead, she paused in the doorway, long hair tumbling about her shoulders, eyes steady in the dim light, and acknowledged that her long vigil of faith had reached its end. In that moment the streets of York grew still, as if the very stones held their breath, and a single candle guttered before the altar dripped its final tear of wax. Thus concluded the first act in the martyrdom of the woman history would remember as the Pearl of York Margaret Clio, who had chosen conviction over compromise and faith over fear in a world determined to crush both. Once the sheriff's men had seized her at dawn's pale light, Margaret Clio found herself bound in rough ropes and led through the echoing corridors of York Castle. The torches along the stone walls burned with an indifferent glare, as though they too were weary of the endless business of life and death. Within hours, she was brought before the ornate bench of Judge Clench, his robes rustling like dry leaves, and the chamber packed with Protestant officials eager to witness her downfall. According to English law of that age, every defendant must enter a plea either guilty or not guilty before any trial could proceed. To refuse was to invite the ultimate penalty of peine forte et dure, strong and hard punishment, in which the condemned would be pressed to death beneath stones heaped upon his body. Margaret, who carried within her a child of barely 6 months' growth, understood perfectly the stakes. Should she plead, her family and servants would be compelled to testify against her, invoking oath upon oath in a public spectacle. The thought of her young children or loyal household staff condemning her was unbearable. And so, when the clerk intoned the demand, "Margaret Clio, what say you? Are you guilty or not guilty of harbouring seminary priests?" She lifted her chin with gentle resolve. In a clear voice barely above a whisper, she declared, "I know of no offence whereof I should confess myself guilty." Ohushfel, the judge, amused at first, frowned as he repeated the question. "How then do you answer the charge of sheltering a priest?" Again, Margaret offered no words. The silence she kept spoke louder than any confession. It was not ignorance but choice, a deliberate refusal to allow her loved ones to be called as witnesses. Those in attendance exchanged glances, some sympathetic, most scornful, but none doubted her meaning. By refusing to plead, she effectively sealed her fate. In the eyes of the law, she had chosen pressing over trial. Judge Clench, sensing both the gravity of the moment and the unusual fortitude of his prisoner, made one final appeal. He spoke of her unborn child. "Lady Clio, think of the life within you. Abandon this course and plead that your child may have a mother to guide it." Yet Margaret, serene as a still pond at midnight, remained motionless. Her steadfast gaze met his. In that pause, the courtroom seemed to tilt on its axis, as though the very wheels of justice hesitated before such unyielding conviction. Thus began the 3 days of preparation that stretched ahead like an interminable dream. Removed from the clamour of the courtroom, Margaret was returned to a narrow cell, its walls damp with centuries of sorrow. The cot upon which she lay was but a plank, and the straw beneath offered little comfort. Yet in that cold retreat, she spent her final hours in quiet ritual. She knelt upon the straw, head bowed low, murmuring prayers in Latin and English, her voice rising and falling like a lullaby meant for the unborn child she carried. During those days, she wrote letters, slender sheets of parchment inscribed in copperplate, each word tender with love. To her husband, John Clio, she entrusted the care of their 2 young children, beseeching him to nurture their faith and remember her with compassion rather than bitterness. To her parish friends, she bequeathed the small sum she had saved, asking that they care for her servants with kindness. These final missives she sealed with wax, their seals pressed with the image of a single rose, the emblem of her secret congregation. Outside the castle walls, the authorities wrestled with their conscience. Peine forte et dure was a punishment rarely invoked. Few had lived to testify of its horrors. To apply it now to a woman in child, whose dignity shone in every measured breath, felt excessively cruel even to hardened magistrates. Some feared the public might recoil at the sight of stones raining upon her chest. Others whispered that such brutality would only cement her legacy as a martyr. Yet the law, once set in motion by her own refusal, could not be easily stayed. Inside her cell, Margaret found solace only in her prayers and memories. She recalled the hush of the hidden chapel, the candlelight dancing on carved wooden beams, and the hushed voices of the faithful gathered close. She imagined the faces of her children, Anne's bright eyes, Thomas's tentative grin, and tucked those visions close to her heart. Each evening, a single candle was brought to her cell. Its flame fluttered against the stone, just as her resolve fluttered against the weight of impending death. And so, as the 3 days waned, she sat by that single light, unbowed. The world outside its clamour of politics, its strictures of law faded into a distant murmur. In that quiet, she embraced her fate. If to die slowly beneath stones was the price of her silence, then so be it. There, in the most profound stillness, Margaret Clio prepared to meet the dawn of her final act, her spirit calm and her faith unbroken. On the morning of the 25th of March in the year 1586, a day sacred in the Catholic calendar as the Feast of the Annunciation, the city of York awoke under a leaden sky. Damp mist curled through the narrow streets, clinging to rooftops and cobblestones alike, as though reluctant to let go of the night's chill. At the rear gate of York Castle, officers of the court quietly arranged the instruments of punishment. A beam of oak, its length exceeding 7 feet, lay ready. Beneath it, sharp stones were meticulously positioned to concentrate pressure upon a single point of the back. Nearby, several iron weights and heavy rocks, each carefully measured, were stacked in precise order. Only the appointed observers, royal officials, Protestant ministers, and the castle guard were permitted within the enclosure. Margaret's family, her servants, and her 2 small children were barred from witnessing the solemn proceedings. Clad in her finest attire, a gown of deep blue damask trimmed with plain white linen, Margaret emerged just before dawn. Her steps were measured, her posture unbowed, as she approached the silent assembly. A hush fell among the witnesses as she knelt beside the wooden beam, folding her hands upon her lap. In that quiet moment, the first pale rays of sunrise pierced the mist, illuminating the scene with a fragile gold light. Margaret's eyes, steady and resolute, met those of Judge Clench across the courtyard, but she offered no words of fear or defiance. Instead, she raised her face heavenward in prayer, as if seeking solace from the unseen presence she had served in secret. When the time came, Margaret spoke her final entreaty. "I forgive all who have brought me to this day, and I pray that God will enlighten the Queen and all the people of this land." Her voice was soft yet clear, carrying across the shivering stones like a lullaby. A single tear traced its path down her cheek. With a gentle nod to the executioner, she lay upon the oak beam, positioning herself so that the sharp stones would bear directly upon her back. Her gown rustled as she shifted, but her composure remained unbroken. The first iron weight, a cube of dense cast metal, was placed atop the door that covered her prone form. A muffled groan escaped her lips as the pressure settled. The Protestant minister, eager to call her back from her faith, cried out, "Recant now, Margaret Clio, and save yourself." But beneath the wooden barrier, her prayers continued unabated, whispered in Latin, "Sancta Maria, ora pro nobis." The hush of her voice, muffled though it was, carried with it both strength and serenity. One by one, additional stones were added, stone, the size of a small loaf of bread, then a larger boulder, each piled with deliberate slowness. With each new mass, a subtle crack resonated as her ribs yielded to the relentless weight. The assembly watched in solemn silence, the only sound the dull thud of stone meeting wood and the faint rustle of fabric. Margaret's breathing grew laboured, yet even as each breath became a laborious effort, her murmured prayers swelled and receded like gentle waves upon a tranquil shore. 15 minutes passed in a sequence of agonizing progression, though to those present it seemed both an instant and an eternity. Her final murmur drifted upward, as the last of the weights, a heavy round disc, settled into place. Then, in the stillness that followed, the executioner gently lifted the beam. When the covers were removed, Margaret lay silent, her body broken, but her face peaceful, as though in sleep rather than in death. Those who gazed upon her noted the calm repose of her features. The slightest curve of her lips and the faint colour of her cheeks suggested not horror, but a transcendent release. Thus concluded the martyrdom of Margaret Clio, known thereafter as the Pearl of York. The courtyard, so recently filled with hushed anticipation, seemed to exhale its grief into the morning air. As the assembly dispersed in respectful sorrow, only the echo of distant bells carried forward the memory of that dawn, an enduring testament to unwavering faith and the quiet courage that can outshine even the darkest shadows of cruelty. And to fully grasp the horror the victim endured, let us examine each step of this pressing execution method, an agonizing blend of slow and brutal torture, where every additional stone adds another layer of pain, pushing the condemned to the very limits of endurance. The pressing execution method, peine forte et dure, was among the most brutal forms of torture ever codified in criminal law during the medieval and early modern periods in Europe. A victim, usually someone who refused to plead guilty or to testify, was bound face down upon a hard surface of earth or stone, their body stretched out straight on a rigid wooden board. Beneath their back, carefully selected sharp stones were placed to focus the full force of compression onto a single point, thereby accelerating bone fractures and pulverizing soft tissues. Before the procedure began, the condemned was positioned within a wooden frame more than 7 feet in length, where the stones had been arranged in advance. The executioner then draped the board over the victim's body and began placing stones one by one. Each stone's weight increased gradually according to strict guidelines, starting with small rocks of a few pounds and progressing to larger boulders that could weigh as much as several 100 pounds. Each stone was lowered onto the board slowly and deliberately, ensuring the condemned endured each wave of excruciating pain, in turn pain that continued without respite until ribs shattered and internal organs were crushed beyond recognition. During the execution, the victim had no opportunity to cry out for mercy. Their mouth was often bound, or they were forced to lie face down, causing near asphyxiation from the first stones alone. Struggles for breath, searing agony, and overwhelming terror produced faint groans that eventually became intermittent cries. Under the enormous pressure, their body convulsed, sweat mingled with blood from fractured ribs, and a dark crimson stain spread across the damp wooden plank. For the first few stones, the victim remained conscious enough to feel each crack of bone, but only minutes later, the combination of agonizing pain and oxygen deprivation induced a gradual loss of consciousness. Yet the pressing method was designed to prolong this ordeal until the body could endure no more. In the final moments, when air could no longer fill the lungs and the heart ceased its beat, the condemned slipped into death. The cruelty of this method lay not merely in causing death, but in transforming it into a horrific spectacle that those who witnessed could not ignore. Many officials and guards shuddered at the sight of stones heaped one upon another, the brittle snap of bones, and deaths that could last up to several dozen minutes. Pressing was not a quick end like hanging or beheading. It was an agonizing sentence of bodily destruction, employed when the law demanded maximum severity as a warning to anyone daring to challenge authority. Looking back from the present day, we recognize that this brutality far exceeded ordinary judicial punishment, forcing victims to suffer not only excruciating physical torment, but also public humiliation. Pressing stands as a tragic reminder of how legal systems can become instruments of annihilation when they deprive individuals of their most fundamental rights first, the right to remain silent, and ultimately, the right to live. And as the echoes of that grim dawn faded from the towers of York Castle, the news of Margaret Clio's execution spread like a sombre whisper across England and beyond its shores. In hidden enclaves and candlelit rooms, English Catholics gathered in secret to honour the woman who had dared to sacrifice herself for faith and family. They knelt upon icy flagstones, their hearts warmed by flickering tapers, as whispered prayers, Sancta Maria, ora pro nobis, rippled through walls, meant to silence them. Even some Protestant ministers, hearing of Margaret's composure in the face of crushing stones, found themselves stirred with reluctant admiration. Across the sea in Paris and Rome, memorial masses were offered in absentia, the Latin intonations weaving a tapestry of solidarity that transcended borders. In Flanders and the German principalities, pamphlets circulated among Catholic refugees, eulogizing the Pearl of York as a modern-day martyr whose steadfast refusal to betray others had illuminated the path of conscience. These accounts spoke of a gentle mother who knelt to pray, even as her bones were broken that a simple woman's courage could outshine the might of kings. Back in London, Queen Elizabeth's council convened in uneasy session. Rather than quell Catholic resistance, the brutal spectacle of the pressing had forged a new icon for the persecuted to rally around. Internal reports warned that the cruelty was counterproductive. Fear alone would not secure loyalty. Sympathy would breed quiet contempt. Whispers in the corridors of power speculated whether the crown should temper its severity, lest the memory of Margaret's pain undermine its own authority. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens in market towns and villages whispered at alehouses and hearthsides. "Have you heard," they would ask, "of the butcher's wife who refused to plead even for her child?" Mothers tucked their babies closer, and fathers rubbed their chins in troubled thought, wondering if laws that permitted such horrors were fit for an age of growing civility. Even John Clio, racked by grief at the loss of his beloved wife, saw no alternative but to publicly endorse the verdict to preserve his family's livelihood and his own standing among the merchant adventurers. Behind closed doors, however, he reverenced her memory with a dread and tenderness that defied his public posture. In York itself, the once flourishing network of sanctuary collapsed. Doors that had opened at midnight remained closed. Hidden panels gathered dust where priests once knelt. Yet the legend of Margaret Clio endured in murmured tales. How her tear fell like a single pearl upon the oak, and how her prayer outlasted the stones. It was Father John Mush, one of those very priests she had sheltered, who preserved her story. In trembling hand he wrote his account of their clandestine masses, of the secret signals, and of the night she counselled him to flee before the dawn raid. His manuscript, bound in worn leather and hidden beneath floorboards, became the indispensable source for English Catholic history. Within a year of her martyrdom, the first biography of Margaret Clio appeared in print. The author, identifying only as a devout admirer, described her life in painstaking detail, from her childhood in the candlelit shop of Thomas Middleton to her courageous stand beneath the weight of iron and stone. The volume painted her not as a grand heroine of legend, but as a simple woman of quiet virtue. It recounted the ripple of grief through York's narrow streets, and the hush that fell over secret congregations whenever her name was spoken. Though printed abroad to evade English censors, the book found its way into the hands of many across the realm. Pages wore thin from furtive reading, and torn scraps of parchment carried her words, "I forgive all who have brought me here," as a balm to afflicted souls. In remote farmhouses, peasants tucked lines of her biography into prayer books. In merchant homes, readers paused over the account of her final plea for the Queen's enlightenment. Thus, even as York's hidden chapels lay silent, the spirit of Margaret Clio continued to kindle hope. Hers was a story whispered in the night by those who refused to let faith be extinguished by fear. And in those quiet echoes, like a lullaby for the weary, the Pearl of York lived on, a testament that a single act of profound conviction could outlast the heaviest stones. And so, in the decades and centuries that followed, the Catholic Church began the solemn process of recognizing Margaret Clio's sanctity. Documents preserved in the Vatican archives reveal that she was declared blessed in the year 1929 and was solemnly canonized in 1970. This journey towards sainthood unfolded against the backdrop of the Second Vatican Council, a time when Catholics and Protestants alike sought reconciliation. In that spirit of ecumenism, the Church looked to Margaret's story as a rallying point for shared respect of religious freedom, acknowledging that her sacrifice transcended the boundaries of any single denomination. From a historical vantage, Margaret's life and death illustrate how a society can descend into cruelty when faith becomes a tool of oppression. Yet it was precisely that same faith, quiet, steadfast, and deeply personal, that awakened extraordinary courage within her. Under stones heavier than her own body, she found the strength to protect the innocent and to offer herself as a living testament to conscience over coercion. Over time, scholars and theologians have reflected that her martyrdom embodies the paradox of suffering that frees rather than enslaves, a painful crucible that forged a universal message of dignity. Today, Margaret Clio stands as a global symbol of the right to freedom of conscience. Her example reminds us that even the humblest individual may influence the course of history. In classrooms and auditoriums, her name appears alongside other champions of human rights, illustrating how one person's moral steadfastness can ripple outward to touch countless lives. Her canonization in 1970 was hailed not only within the Catholic world but also by advocates for religious liberty everywhere, who recognized in her story the affirmation that no government or court may arrogate the authority to extinguish the light of a sincere soul. As we reflect upon the centuries since her pressing beneath stones, it is remarkable to consider how Margaret's witness has endured. Her tale, once confined to whispered prayers in hidden chapels, now resonates through printed biographies, scholarly monographs, and even musical compositions. Across continents and generations, people gather on the anniversary of her death, March the 25th, to recall her final words of forgiveness and her prayer for the Queen's enlightenment. In these commemorations, the austere setting of the castle courtyard is replaced by candlelit halls and flower-adorned altars, yet the core of her sacrifice remains unchanged. With a voice as gentle as the York mist, the telling of her story carries the hush of a lullaby. Each detail, the placement of stones, the crack of a rib, the flutter of her final prayer unfolds deliberately, allowing listeners to absorb the depth of her resolve without feeling rushed. It is a cadence that mirrors the ebb and flow of breath in prayer, inviting calm reflection rather than sensational horror. And so, as the narrative drifts across your mind, you may picture the flicker of candlelight against ancient stone and sense the hush of evening air that once cloaked her hidden masses. Now, dear listener, let us rest for a moment in that serene remembrance. Let the story of Margaret Clitherow, the Pearl of York, sink softly into your thoughts as you settle into quiet contemplation. In the days ahead, we will embark upon 5 more parts, each delving more deeply into the policies of persecution that shaped her era, the subtle intrigues within Elizabeth's court, and the enduring legacy she bequeathed to subsequent generations. So, relax your gaze, soften your breathing, and allow the chill of York's time-worn streets to wash over you like a gentle breeze. In this stillness, the courage of one woman stands revealed, urging us to honor conscience above all else. Rest now, and prepare to journey further into the hidden chapters of history where faith and power entwined, and where Margaret's light continues to guide the way. In the years that followed Margaret Clithero's martyrdom, the court of Queen Elizabeth drew tighter the noose around English Catholics, employing ever more ruthless measures to stamp out any vestige of their ancient faith. In the wake of her death, Parliament passed the Act of 1587, which broadened the definition of priest hunting so that anyone found sheltering a seminary priest was declared a traitor to the crown. What had begun with the Clitherow household swiftly spread into a nationwide purge. Networks in York, in Lancashire, and across the southern shires were exposed through the trembling confessions of frightened servants. Under this new law, neighbours were encouraged to spy upon one another, for the Crown offered handsome rewards to anyone who betrayed secret masses or the hiding places of priests. As bounty hunters and informants scoured the countryside, the government assembled a sophisticated web of agents. These spies disguised themselves as humble pilgrims, slipping into tight-knit congregations under the pretense of seeking spiritual solace. They intercepted letters sealed with wax, rifled through prized bottles of rosewater and anointed oils, and seized any Catholic vestments or manuscripts that might testify against their owners. Within hours of a raid, safe houses were stripped of their altars, prayer books were consigned to the flames in the town square, and torn fragments of rosary beads were scattered in mockery across the cobbles. The once sporadic religious police, never a large force, now became a spectre haunting every farmhouse and manor, their sudden knocks echoing through corridors at all hours, condemned to terrorize families who dared to shelter their faith. Yet the very ferocity of this crackdown had the unintended effect of driving the Catholic community deeper underground. News of Margaret's fate had shown both the cost and the power of steadfast faith, prompting priests and laity alike to refine their clandestine operations. Father John Mush, whose life Margaret had spared by her courageous silence, lingered to continue ministering to the scattered faithful. He meticulously chronicled the methods by which he and his fellow clergy had evaded detection, recording in minute detail the signals used to summon worshippers: an upturned crucifix on a window ledge, a single rose placed atop a gatepost, the discreet arrangement of pewter plates in a shop window. His journal, smuggled from York to Flanders and back, became the de facto manual for dozens of priests who arrived on England's shores in the following years, determined to persevere despite the dangers. Inspired by these writings, Catholic sympathizers engineered ever more ingenious hideaways. Some converted rural barns into two-layered sanctuaries, with false floors lifted by simple pulley systems to conceal vestments beneath earthen thresholds. Others hollowed out abandoned coal mines or derelict stone quarries, fashioning chapels from the rock itself, and rigging the entrance tiles so that they could be lifted silently when danger drew near. In the grand townhouses of sympathetic gentry, hidden panels in wainscoting revealed secret rooms, complete with concealed confessionals and altars that disappeared behind swaths of tapestry. Communication across this shadow network grew equally inventive. Families arranged their window shutters in coded patterns. 3 shutters closed, 2 open, signified a safe gathering. A tilted lantern hung from an oak beam meant that Mass would begin at midnight. Ingenious laypeople devised the portable Mass, carrying small brass censers and foldable prayer stands in leather satchels, enabling worship to be conducted anywhere from a misty copse at dusk to the rusted interior of a disused mine shaft. Though each service carried the risk of discovery, the shared terror only bound them more closely, fostering a fierce solidarity among these hidden congregations. By the late 1580s, Elizabeth's regime faced a vexing paradox. The more severe its punishments, the more cohesive and determined the Catholic underground became. Large-scale raids disrupted this network only briefly, for around each sunny glade or beneath every fallen pier lay a new sanctuary waiting to be uncovered. In attempting to suffocate Catholicism through legal brutality, the authorities had inadvertently forged a resilient movement of small, adaptable cells that could shift and vanish at a moment's notice. Margaret Clio's legacy shone as the catalyst for this transformation. Her silent sacrifice had shown that conviction need not be grand to be powerful, that even the simplest woman alone and afraid could spark a revolution of spirit. The model of little communities, each self-sufficient and nimble, continued to sustain English Catholics throughout the 17th century. In farmsteads and manor houses, in ruined temples and forest shrines, the flame she had ignited burned on, unquenched by iron or stone, illuminating a path of steadfast resistance that would endure long after the final edict had been rescinded. In the mid-19th century, the clandestine worship movement in England evolved into a matter of international intrigue. From the courts of the Habsburgs in Vienna to the secret chambers of the Vatican, generous funds, devotional texts, and ordained clergy were dispatched to support beleaguered Catholics in Britain. Young priests, several of them graduates of Oxford and Cambridge, were sent back to their homeland under assumed identities as tutors, apothecaries, or merchants. Each carried precious relics, a fragment of embroidered cloth, a sliver of bone, a vial of blessed water meant to sustain the faithful and kindle a shared sense of spiritual solidarity. In York, the Clio family home where Margaret Clio had met her fate through the ordeal of pressing was itself transformed into an underground shrine. Word spread among Catholic households that the very stones which had pressed her body could now sanctify the space where her courage had shone brightest. Some families pooled their resources to purchase the property, while others erected a simple statue of the Pearl of York in the shadow of the facade. Thus, the memory of her sacrifice took on a tangible form, signalling that resistance had transcended personal devotion to become a national network. Across Lancashire, the Midlands, Northumberland, and Cornwall, these regions earned the grim sobriquet of Red Zones, for they harboured the oldest and most enduring Catholic lineages, each resolved to preserve their traditions in the face of unyielding pressure. Amid this underground resurgence, a number of secret societies sprang into being. Perhaps the most noted was the Order of St. Patrick, founded by exiled Irish nobles as a fraternity dedicated to circulating aid, intelligence, and safe conduct among English recusants. By the end of the 16th decade of the 17th century, estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of English Catholics practiced their faith in hidden chapels beneath Anglican churches, in the cellars of clandestine schools, and even within the bound straw of deserted barns. The financial lifeblood of these operations came from discreet donations by erstwhile Catholic aristocrats, and from subsidies sent via the Spanish Empire, which viewed the plight of English Catholics as both a religious cause and a geopolitical lever. International pressure thus began to weigh heavily upon Elizabeth's government. In Parliament, some voices advocated for moderation, arguing that such extreme measures were isolating England diplomatically and threatening trade relations with Catholic powers. Others, staunchly conservative and fearful of the old faith's influence, insisted that only absolute victory for Protestantism could secure the throne. The result was a bitter tug-of-war within the court, fracturing unity and forcing Elizabeth to navigate a delicate balance between maintaining internal security and preserving her reputation on the European stage. Back in York, Margaret Clio's legacy lived on not only in brick and mortar, but also in the pages of clandestine literature. Father John Mush's treatise, often referred to simply as Mush's Memoirs, circulated in carefully hidden copies. It detailed the art of covert worship, the signals passed between families, and the network of sanctuaries that had grown from the embers of Margaret's own refuge. Likewise, ballads and folk poems sprang up among the rural poor, their verses recounting how on nights of full moon, the white-robed apparition of Margaret could be seen guiding a hidden priest through secret tunnels. Though these tales lacked verifiable documentation, they served to renew hope and inspire perseverance among the faithful. In these whispered legends, Margaret remained ever present, a spectral guardian clothed in white, torch in hand, leading her people from darkness into light. Whether sung by shepherds on the moors or murmured by weaving wives beside their hearths, the story of her martyrdom became a beacon across time, proof that even under the most draconian of edicts, the human spirit could find avenues of resistance. Thus, the mid-19th century revival of secret worship owed much to the groundwork laid centuries earlier by Margaret Clio. Her pressing beneath stones had been intended as the ultimate silencing of Catholic defiance. Instead, it sparked an underground renaissance that reached from York to Vienna and Rome, from hidden Dublin taverns to the corridors of foreign courts. In every coded letter and whispered prayer, her memory endured a testament that in the heart of tyranny, a single act of unyielding faith can kindle a flame that no decree can extinguish. Beginning in the 17th century, England's currents of history surged with the upheaval of civil war and the rise of the Rump Parliament. The wars of the Three Kingdoms pitted the royalist forces loyal to King Charles I against the fervent Puritans who sought to purge the Church of England of all vestiges of ritual. Amid this maelstrom, English Catholics already branded as potential agents of the Vatican found themselves navigating between two warring factions. In that perilous tide, the clandestine network established by Margaret Clio became a refuge not only for persecuted priests, but also for agents of both camps. Its hidden chapels and secret corridors provided shelter for wounded soldiers and served as training grounds for clandestine scouts and medics. The historian James Gillitin, in his seminal work The Hidden Narrative, illuminates the pivotal role that Catholic families played in the art of intelligence gathering. By assuming the guise of loyal subjects, these laypersons passed coded messages in the form of embroidered patterns on clothing, concealed dispatches within hollowed-out hymnals, and even stashed arms in the hidden cellars of their manor houses. At the battles of Edgehill and Marston Moor, enterprising Catholics slipped through the ranks of both royalist and parliamentarian forces, tending to the wounded with clandestine vials of oil and restrained prayers. Their intimate knowledge of wooded glades and secret tunnels allowed them to ferry injured soldiers away from the front lines under the cover of darkness. In doing so, they proved to be unexpected allies to both sides, their devotion to human life outweighing any factional loyalty. Yet the mid-century era brought renewed persecution under Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth. The Puritan authorities, emboldened by their victory, imposed harsh restrictions on all forms of public worship they deemed popish. Choirs were disbanded, organs were smashed, and even the mere sound of a bell tolling for Mass became an offence punishable by fines or imprisonment. Monasteries and abbeys that had survived the Reformation were forcibly dissolved, their cloisters left to crumble into dust. Many Catholic priests and lay faithful chose exile in Bohemia, France, or Spain rather than face the full weight of these edicts. Nevertheless, thanks to the resilient network first kindled by Margaret Clio's courage, the mobile prayer persisted. Small bands of worshippers gathered at midnight beside abandoned mine shafts or within overgrown woodlands, chanting the liturgy by candlelight, before dispersing at the first hint of dawn. The restoration of the monarchy in the year 1661 marked a subtle shift in religious policy. King Charles II, while personally inclined toward leniency for Catholics, recognized the necessity of maintaining the goodwill of his predominantly Protestant Parliament. He issued proclamations that relaxed punishments for recusancy. Those who refused to attend Anglican services were granted a greater degree of tolerance, provided their gatherings remained discreet. For the first time in decades, Catholics were able to convene in private chapels within aristocratic mansions without immediate fear of arrest. These gatherings, though still clandestine, could now include a small retinue of worshippers and even the ordination of new priests on English soil. This gradual easing of repression paved the way for a more enduring settlement of religious liberty. The Toleration Act of 1689, passed under King William and Queen Mary, officially granted freedom of worship to Protestant dissenters, and by custom, it was extended in practice to nonconformist Catholics. Restrictions on postal delivery of devotional literature were lifted, and the government ceased its routine censorship of printed prayer books. Thus, the legacy of Margaret Clitherow, once an obscure butcher's wife pressed beneath stones for her unwillingness to betray her friends, bloomed into a symbol of modern religious freedom. Her story demonstrated that a single individual's unwavering conviction could inspire generations to resist tyranny, to refine the art of solidarity, and ultimately to secure the right of every conscience to worship without fear. In the hush of reflection that follows these recollections, one may imagine the quiet resolve of those 17th century families, their prayers drifting beneath chapel floors and echoing through the hollow trunks of ancient trees. Their solidarity, born of clandestine devotion, would shape the very notion of religious plurality in Britain and beyond. And it all traces back to the indomitable faith of one woman, the Pearl of York, whose example guided the faithful through stormy seas, across the ravages of war and the zealotry of extremism, toward the calmer harbours of tolerance and mutual respect. As the 18th century drew to a close, the currents of the Enlightenment swept across Europe, like a gentle dawn breaking through centuries of twilight. In drawing rooms and salons from Paris to Edinburgh, thinkers invoked the power of reason and the dignity of the human person to challenge every institution founded upon violence and coercion, including the persecution of the faithful. John Locke's essays on toleration resonated anew, reminding his readers that it is the business of the civil magistrate to preserve civil interests and leave the things of conscience to the care of every man's private judgment. Likewise, Montesquieu's writings on the separation of powers and Voltaire's biting satires on intolerance painted the ordeal of Margaret Clitherow in stark relief, lauding her as the most dreadful emblem of medieval cruelty, inflicted in the name of religion. In Locke's view, the soul held sovereignty beyond the reach of earthly rulers. To coerce belief was to destroy the very essence of liberty. He penned letters extolling the virtue of toleration, noting that no injury is done to the body of society when a man may think and speak his mind in matters of faith. Montesquieu took this further, arguing that laws must rest upon the consent of the governed rather than the decrees of fear. He cited Margaret's suffering beneath unrelenting stones as the supreme example of legal overreach, where the magistrate's power crushed not only the bones but the spirit of a gentlewoman who sought only to follow her conscience. Voltaire, ever the provocateur, immortalized Margaret in biting verse and essay. Under his pen, her story became a rallying cry. In York's cold courtyard, a martyr lay, beneath the weight of crown and state, her only crime, to kneel and pray. When law decreed her faith was hate, his work sparked heated debate within the British Parliament. Members rose to denounce the special penalties still levied against Catholics, penalties that had long since ceased to appear in any civilized code. Why, they asked, should a man lose property, liberty, or even life for the crime of worship? Arguments for repeal gained momentum. First the fines were commuted, then the restrictions on property inheritance were eased. By the early years of the new century, whisperings of total abolition of these punitive statutes filled the corridors of Westminster. In private correspondence with his colleagues, Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger expressed sympathy for the Catholic plight. He wrote that, "In a realm professing liberty, it is a stain upon our character that we perpetuate laws born in an age when stones and iron weighed more heavily than reason or mercy." His influence helped secure the passage of the Relief Act of 1728, which removed the requirement that Catholics take the sacramental oath before holding public office. Yet it was the testimony of Margaret Clithero's sacrifice, recounted by surviving descendants and preserved in the pages of Enlightenment tracts, that lent moral force to the movement, humanizing the abstract debates over rights and toleration. Some dissenters still cautioned prudence, We must not rush headlong into equality without regard for social cohesion, they posited, fearful of alienating the staunch Protestant majority. But the chorus for reform grew irresistible. Enlightenment societies throughout Britain and the continent embraced Margaret's memory as a symbol of what could happen when laws fall prey to superstition and cruelty. In Edinburgh, the Speculative Society organised a series of lectures on religious liberty, each closing with a solemn reading of her final prayer. May God enlighten the hearts of rulers and grant mercy to those who err. End quote. Even the courts, once relentless in enforcing recusancy laws, began to look upon Catholic worship with a more lenient eye. Trials for merely attending Mass were dismissed for want of evidence. Property seizures were reversed. Imprisoned priests were released, in the name of justice tempered by charity. Across the land, Catholics who once cowered in secret chambers now emerged, conducting worship in private chapels that mirrored the architectural anonymity Margaret had pioneered centuries before. Thus, as the 18th century waned, Britain found itself on the threshold of a new era, one in which reason and compassion would temper the harsh legacies of intolerance. It was Margaret Clithero's memory, carried on the pages of Enlightenment tracts and whispered in lecture halls, that guided policymakers toward a broader conception of liberty. From the darkness of York's hidden cellars to the hushed debates of Parliament, her story illuminated the path to a society where the rights of conscience would no longer be crushed beneath stones of persecution, but held sacred as the birthright of every free soul. By the dawn of the 20th century, Margaret Clithero's harrowing tale had taken on a life far beyond the dusty pages of history books, unfolding anew across stages and screens. In 2002, the British Broadcasting Corporation released the documentary The Pearl of York, which captured global attention with its unflinching recreation of the pressing and its thoughtful reflections from living witnesses. Viewers were guided through shadowed reenactments of the oak beam and iron weights, while historians in softly lit libraries traced the evolution of peine forte et dure. Human rights lawyers spoke in measured tones of the legal implications, and representatives of the Catholic Church described how Margaret's sacrifice had shaped notions of conscience and martyrdom. Each interview was framed by gentle piano chords and the distant echo of church bells, creating an atmosphere that invited quiet contemplation rather than sensational shock. Shortly after, in 2015, playwright Patrick Harrington brought Margaret's story to life on the stage of the Royal York Theatre with his play Beneath the Door. Audiences sat in near darkness as flickering candles revealed only the silhouette of a lone woman kneeling before a wooden press. Harrington's minimalist set design, consisting of a single beam, a handful of stones, and a backdrop of medieval York's narrow streets, allowed the actors' hushed dialogue to carry full weight. Critics praised the production not only for its historical accuracy, but also for its exploration of interior landscapes. The actor portraying Margaret moved with serene determination, her whispered monologues revealing the tender fears of a mother and the unwavering resolve of a woman of faith. Night after night, the play drew packed houses, and the hush that fell over the audience as the final stone dropped became something akin to communal prayer. In the realm of fiction, Jane Mortimer's historical novel Stone and Prayer, published in 2010, wove fact and imagination into a tapestry that spanned centuries. Mortimer structured her narrative in alternating chapters, one set in the turbulent 1580s, following Margaret's final days beneath the press, and the next unfolding in the present day, where a modern descendant named Anna Cleary unearthed journals in the attic of the old Clio house. The two timelines converged through parallel interior monologues, revealing how Margaret's inward strength resonated across generations. Mortimer's prose was deliberately lyrical, evoking the hush of candlelit chapels and the slow, deliberate descent of each weight upon Margaret's back. Readers often found themselves lulled by her cadent sentences flowing like gentle streams before being jolted awake by the sudden crack of bone or a trembling confession in the attic. Academic circles soon took notice. Leading universities across England incorporated Stone and Prayer into their curricula for courses on Western history and literature. Professors highlighted Mortimer's skillful blending of political context, such as the Elizabethan settlement of 1559 and the treason laws of 1587, with intimate portrayals of personal sacrifice. Seminar discussions examined how fiction could illuminate the emotional truth behind dry statutes, prompting students to draw connections between religious oppression and modern debates over freedom of belief. In tutorial rooms, undergraduates traced the lineage of narrative techniques back to medieval chronicles and Enlightenment essays, while in lecture halls of oak panels, the novel's alternating structure became a case study in storytelling that bridged past and present. Beyond theatre and literature, Margaret Clio's story inspired exhibitions in museums and galleries throughout the early 21st century. Curators displayed film stills from the Pearl of York alongside original correspondence facsimiles of letters Margaret had penned to her husband, sealed in crimson wax. Visitors moved through dimly lit corridors, paused at vitrines holding extracts of Mortimer's manuscript, and listened to audio recordings of Harrington's actors reciting key passages. The sensory experience was designed to mirror the tension between concealment and revelation that defined Margaret's life. Social media, too, took up the cause. Hashtags such as Pearl of York trended on platforms where enthusiasts shared photographs of the themed stage set, video clips of Beneath the Door, and selfies taken in front of York's reconstructed execution site. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to parsing Mortimer's dual timelines, while online forums buzzed with debates over the ethical dimensions of reenacting such brutal history. In these varied artistic forms, documentary, drama, novel, exhibition, and digital dialogue, Margaret Clio's legacy found fresh resonance. Each medium, with its own languid rhythm or hushed tone, offered audiences a chance to surrender to the story's emotional current, to feel the slow descent of stones and the steady beat of a resolute heart. And as viewers, readers and theatregoers drifted between scenes of quiet prayer and moments of excruciating pain, they carried forward the memory of a simple woman whose steadfast faith and silent courage continued to illuminate the human capacity for resilience. And now, as the last echoes of Margaret Clio's steadfast heartbeat drift away into the quiet corridors of memory, allow your breath to slow and your thoughts to soften like petals settling on a still pond. Imagine the candlelight in that hidden chapel, its flame wavering ever so gently, casting tender shadows that dance upon ancient stones and hushing the world outside. Feel the hush of York's misty streets wrap around you like a soft blanket, carrying with it the lesson of a single life that stood unwavering beneath the weight of iron and stone. In that serene hush lies the story's true message, that even in the darkest moments, one person's courage can kindle a light of hope that warms generations to come. Margaret's silent prayer beneath the press reminds us that conviction of the heart need never shout to be heard, that quiet acts of compassion and integrity can outlast the loudest thunder of oppression. It is an invitation to honor our own beliefs gently, to protect the fragile spark of conscience in ourselves and in others, and to remember that compassion, like a candle flame, grows stronger when we shelter it from the wind. As you nestle deeper into comfort, let the image of that lone figure in deep blue damask dissolve slowly, becoming a soft glow at the edge of your mind's eye. Feel the tension in your shoulders unfurl, your eyelids grow heavy, and your heartbeat settle into a calm, steady rhythm like a lullaby sung by ancient stones. Allow the memory of her forgiveness, offered even as the stones fell, to wash over you in a soothing tide, reminding you that mercy and strength are not opposites but two sides of the same gentle courage. There is no rush here, only the unhurried trail of a single breath, in and out, guiding you toward restful peace. Know that the values Margaret embodied, faith, resilience, and quiet solidarity, are not distant echoes of a bygone era, but living whispers that dwell in each of us, ready to guide our choices in kindness and integrity. As you drift further into calm, carry those whispers with you, like treasured relics tucked safely in the heart. Soon, the candle's glow will fade, and the chapel's hush will dissolve into the soft embrace of night. In that gentle darkness, may you find comfort in knowing that even the heaviest burdens can be borne with grace, and that every act of courage, however small, contributes to a world where conscience and compassion hold sway over cruelty and fear. Sleep now, dear listener, and let these thoughts lull you into the sweetest of dreams. May your rest be deep and renewing, and may you awaken refreshed by the promise of a new dawn. If you have found comfort in this story, be sure to subscribe to our channel so that, in the nights to come, we may share with you more tales that uplift, inspire, and soothe the soul. Good night, and sleep well.